Hello, one and all, to another session of Stelmo's Rants and Raves. I'm Stelmo. Let's jump right in here. So, Tulsi Gabbard gave us a going away present by releasing all this information she did about all of the labs that we're funding all around the world that are doing gain of function research. Uh, Now, this is probably one of the most misunderstood terms because there's nothing in the name that would suggest the heinous actions that are being committed by these alleged scientists. So let's remind everybody exactly what they're doing. They're taking known pathogens and for instance, let's take the vid. So they would take something like that in the lab and they would experiment with it to find ways to make it more deadly. Now, let's be clear here. This is not about science looking for a a a fix for a problem. In other words, it's not really a vaccine, or it's not a medicine, or it's none of that stuff. But what they want is for a pathogen to be able to kill more people. And I believe, at least, that the people who are behind this are the same people who were behind the guide stones in Georgia. You know, where they had their what was dubbed their Ten Commandments. And number one on the list was, the population of the earth would be limited to 800 million people. And needless to say, that means there's like 7 or 8 billion people on this planet that these loons have to get rid of. So let's talk about those loons for a minute. They're for the most part, they're wealthy individuals, and they have been convinced that the planet is dying, and that if they don't drastically reduce the population of the planet, then everyone is going to need the mortician services. And so, in their eyes, it's us or them, and they're coming after us. And Gabby, you know, all this information makes crystal clear what most of us already knew. I mean, it's been a long time since we have heard about the surreptitious labs that the U.S. was operating in Ukraine, which was one of the reasons why the Biden administration was so adamant about protecting Ukraine, because they couldn't allow the Russians to expose what they were doing in these labs. Well, it continues, because here's the one thing that the DNI did not tell us. She didn't tell us about any arrest of any of the perpetrators who did this. So they're all at large, free to continue their murderous ways. And you best believe that they're looking for that. And what really amazes me is how docile and sheep-like the vast majority of this country is. They're perfectly content with someone out there being out there looking to kill them all off. You know, uh, when historians discuss the Holocaust, one of the things that they say might have made a change is if the civilian population would have had weapons. But people were always curious why the Jewish people didn't fight back. If you're going to die, did you not at least try to make a fight for your continued existence? It would seem a common thing to me. If your only choice of avoiding the mortician services is that you know we have to get rid of these people. I mean, that's just the way it is. These loons out there are looking to kill not just Americans, but people all around the world. And everybody is fairly quiet about this. Now, there are some outspoken people. Certainly, Senator Rand Paul is leading the way there. He's, I mean, he's besides himself as to why there have been no charges yet against Fauci. Now, look, I know Fauci got one of these bogus pardons, but that has to be uh, fought in court. And the sooner it gets fought, the better, because if these leftist loons ever get in power, they're going to pack the court, and you'll be surprised how fast that court reverses so much stuff. And then we'll get to a point when people won't be able to do anything. And the United States and other countries, I fear, are going to suffer their own Holocaust. You know, the biggest problem that I have overall with the Trump administration is the lack of action by the Department of Justice. And this is something Trump has his problems with, and it's not necessarily Trump's fault. In his first term, he was, come on, Jeff Sessions was a law and order guy, so you have to suspect that they had something against him. And I know some people are going to call me a conspiracy theorist, but I want to go down this rabbit hole here for a minute. You know, I think it was Snowden who released a lot of the programs and stuff that the CIA had to use against Americans. And we know that they're able to search things such as emails, text messages, and the like for keywords and stuff. But nobody ever talks about them weaponizing this part of the government. And I think that it has been weaponized just like everything else. But nobody's ever really talked about this. And that's always a problem when you deal with Republicans. The Republican Party historically is a party of reaction. And so they are reactive while the Democrats, Socialists of America are proactive. And unfortunately, the Democrat Socialist Party of America, for the most part, and sadly, even there are some in the GOP establishment that are accepting money from these wealthy loons who want to do such destruction to the general population. And I fear they're going to do it, but there's no outcry. I mean, you would think finding all of these labs that we're funding, looking how to kill more people, that should be alarming to every American. But it's not. They go about their daily thing saying, oh, well, the sooner you kill me, the better or something. I guess. I don't, I can't say what's in their mindset. And, but it's, it's a terrible thing. And why Americans are so docile is I just can't figure it out. The last time that I saw what I consider a conservative grassroots movement was the Tea Party. And the Tea Party was very effective uh, well, the politicians of both parties were terrified. I mean, politicians all around the world always fear something like this when the grassroots, just they become so fed up that they just more or less spontaneously start protesting, and people readily join them because they all agree with the argument being made. And we saw that with the Tea Party. But then they tried, a number of individuals tried using the Tea Party to lift themselves into high political office. And once that started, it was the end of the Tea Party. But since that time, the people have, and, and let's be realistic, the Democrat Socialist Party of America set out to scare the American public into silence. And it's worked. You don't see the people speaking out on too much of anything. And when our own DNI confirms that we've been funding labs all over the place, all studying ways to take known pathogens and make them more deadly to kill more people, something is not right there. I don't want to make this a religious channel, but it sounds to me like those are the acts of Satan. These people are devils in disguise. They're murderous thugs that are using their wealth to the detriment of the less wealthy. You know, I don't buy any of these arguments in these red states for attacking and confiscating the money of wealthy individuals. The Lord knows the wealthy pay more than their fair share. In fact, when you look at what the 1% pays, uh, it's disproportionate, certainly. And they're already paying huge sums. And of course, if you go to take more from them, a lot of them are going to leave. You know, uh, years ago, I was a New York Knicks fan, and as everyone knows, the New York Knicks just won the NBA championship, and I applaud them for that. And I mention it here for only one reason, and that is the comments made by Jalen Brunson, who was the series MVP. And Jalen Brunson was lamenting how much in taxes he has to pay in New York compared to other uh, cities around the country that also host NBA teams. He came from a team in Texas, and he said he really misses the tax system in Texas because they confiscated far less of his money. So if wealthy people are given a chance, they're always going to opt out. They work hard for their money. You know, now I know there are a lot of wealthy people out there who have cheated and stole their way to prosperity. Well, there are crimes, there are laws against that. There are crimes, and they should be prosecuted. But unfortunately, white collar crimes in this country do not receive anywhere near uh, the amount of resources in stopping them that, let's say, the other crimes do. And 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 for this country, see, I think we're entering this really, really dangerous phase because our economy is imploding. Listen, I know I listen to the government. All their numbers say happy days are here again, but you just do not see it when you're out and about in the world. Now, I'm retired. I've been retired for a long time. And when I go into the store, let's say I go to Walmart and I see 4 to 6 associates all gathered at the register talking because there are nobody in their lines for them to check out. You can say to yourself, you know what? There's not as much economic activity as we're used to seeing. And I contend that economically speaking, Florida is always going to be a state that doesn't suffer as badly as the rest of the country because there is so many people like myself that are retired and their income is set and it's coming to them every month, and regardless as to what's happening in the economy. Now, I suspect that there is going to come a point in time, and it's not that far away, when we will start to see people's pensions go bust. And in many of the cases, the federal government is supposed to step in, but where are they going to get the money from? Because we're already so far broke, it isn't even funny. So I'm not sure exactly how that all will play out, but what I'm absolutely convinced on is this country has a lot of problems, and right now those problems are not being addressed. And the worst part of those problems is the fact that they're looking to get rid of so many of us. They want to pack the morticians' front office, so to speak, if I can say it that way. And hopefully that the sheep start to baa real soon here because if not, it doesn't bode well. I'm fortunate. I lived most of my life. I'm in the final chapters of it, and I appreciate the country that I was born and raised in. It's only become the less, I don't know, uh, it got magnified during the Biden years. And, ever since that time, this country has really changed its complexity. And I don't see it going back. You know, uh, for whatever reason, the Trump administration has really decreased the amount of ICE activity. In the beginning, we were seeing ICE activity all around Florida, and I personally know of employees who had some of their underlings were pulled over by local police only to be taken into ICE custody, and within 48 hours, they were back in their home country. So it started well, and there was a lot of opposition. And at some point, I guess the Trump administration, for whatever reason, has decided to lower the amount of activity. You know, here in Florida, a lot of money was spent on this Florida Alcatraz or whatever the heck they want to call it. And certainly it got some use, but the last I heard is they're planning to close it. And why are they planning to close it? Because they don't have enough people to keep it operational. Is why they're just not. And let me tell you, when it comes to this, it's one area again where I think the president. I don't know who's advising them in these issues, but I really think they're making a big mistake because the majority of people in both parties think that all illegal immigrants should be deported, all of them. And so when you have the majority of Americans taking one side and the politicians, especially the politician being Donald Trump, and they have stepped off of this goal of theirs. You know, I was seething the other day because I was in a store and I was in the checkout line, and the poor shopper ahead of me had some sort of problem. I don't know what the problem was, but I know it required the clerk who could barely speak English had to get her coworker, and I listened to him for 5 minutes speaking in Spanish. I have no idea what they were talking about. But, and this is not the first time. I mean, at least the actual clerk spoke very limited English, but she knew the basics. But I've been in stores now here in Florida, in a red state and in red counties, when the person doesn't speak English at the counter. Now that's a problem. That's a big problem. But yet I don't hear anybody talking about it. You know, Donald Trump signed the full funding for ICE for the rest of his term. They have plenty of money. It's not a financial thing. And anyway, even with that, law enforcement is one one aspect of the government that always gets funded, even in shutdown. So I suspect that they were getting paid. I do know a lot of them had to do some services at the airports for a while, but there's no more excuses. We should be seeing the activity exactly like we saw in the beginning because the Lord knows there are so many. You know, I can talk about the county I live in. You know, I'm not going to say I never encountered a person of Spanish lineage, but the ones I did deal with were American citizens and had been born here to American citizens. In fact, most of them were that I met here, at least in my county, were Puerto Ricans, which they're all citizens. So, uh, but that complexity has now changed, and usually out in the stores there are more Spanish speakers than English speakers, and I suspect the only reason I can think of that is in fact the case is that they're still getting government assistance where they have so much more money to spend than the American citizens. And look, James Carville so famously said, "It's the economy, stupid," but yet politicians forget that so often, and it's hard to comprehend why they're this way. Yet they are, and I don't get it. I'll admit I don't get it, but these are all problems, and our country's facing a myriad of really existential problems, and it just doesn't seem to me like anybody's addressing them. And at the top of the list is this funding gain of function research. People need to go to prison for a long, long time for this. This violates American law. But we're increasingly finding out that people can violate American law with impunity if you're part of the political class. And this country can't survive that way. It really can't. And one party is getting more and more violent. And I don't really see the proper amount of force being used in these violent situations. In fact, I would be calling them all insurrections because they're far more of an insurrection than anything that the Democrats, Socialists of America labeled as insurrection. And, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in New York on Thursday. You know, when the team won the championship, it was late at night. A lot of people were in bed. They still burned a bus and saw them jumping on vehicles, but wait a Thursday to this parade. Or I should say in the aftermath of the parade. I think you're going to see, because what's going to happen is we know there's a lot of paid activists over at Delaney Hall in New Jersey. The powers that be, the people who pay for these protesters, they're going to have them moved over to New York, and it's going to be quite violent. And I hope I'm wrong. I really do. I'd love to come on here and say I was wrong, but I don't think I am wrong. And I make this assertion knowing how things have happened in the past in this country. And because because so much of the middle class is being lowered into the lower class because of this rampant, raging inflation that we have, I think you're going to find more and more civil disobedience. You're going to see more and more socialists elected because keep in mind they're offering free stuff. And when you have no stuff and you can't look into your future and see anywhere where you're going to be getting stuff. Well, free stuff sounds real good to you. We've already seen it in New York. The majority of voters in New York are lower middle and lower class individuals. And they want to move up. And so when somebody comes in and tells them, oh, we'll give you free housing and free food, and yeah, we're going to open up all of these government owned stores, and, you know, you'll be leaving the store and they'll be still running out bags of groceries to you because everyone knows nobody pays for it when it's free. It's all free, right? Money doesn't come from anywhere. It's just free, right? Well, unfortunately, too many people believe that. They believe that the government has this unlimited amount of money, and we don't. And where our borrowing is at right now is at a terrible level, and it's not going to get any better. But anyway, I wanted to, I do applaud Tulsi for releasing this information. It's nice to know. Many of us already suspected it, especially when it came to Ukraine and Wuhan. And there's no doubt that Fauci was doing gain of function research. And apparently, those that actually had their full faculties upstairs uh, knew Fauci was responsible for countless crimes, which is why they did their questionable pardon of him. And that needs to be tested in the courts. And the problem with Republicans is they say, Well, you can't convict anyone in Washington, D.C. You can't find a jury. But you know what? And I'm going to go off on a tangent being as I brought this up. What makes these people think that they're not getting rigged jury panels? I mean, the party in charge has showed us they're willing to cheat and do whatever is necessary. And I'm convinced that they always make sure when one of their political class is in fact being charged, that no matter who the lawyers select from the jury panels, they're almost always going to be guaranteed to have one or more ringers on there who, no matter what, are going to vote to acquit. And so they're guaranteed, at best, a hung jury, and if all goes well, an acquittal. But see, the problem is there has to be pushback. You know, lawyers' fees are non-compensable in criminal cases. So, uh, even if these people are acquitted, it's going to cost them a tremendous amount of money. And I think that when it starts to come out of their pocket, it may give them pause to stop and say, you know what, maybe I don't want to do this. It's going to end up costing me. But the Republican Party doesn't push back, and so it keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And that's why ultimately I think our country is doomed. Our politicians need to man up. They need to stand up straight, and they need to act the same way they talked when they were running for office. And if they do that, we'll all be so much better off. But I don't see that happening anytime soon. And with that, I wish you all a great day. Stay safe. It's a crazy world out there. It gets crazier by the day. Thank you. Bye bye.